So a couple weeks ago, I shared from a text where Jesus was preparing people for challenges when they're brought before councils or judges in regards to their faith. But don't worry about what you will say. The Spirit will give you words to say in that moment. So if you're walking by the mission that God would have for your life, basically God's saying, don't worry, I've got this. That's the Luke account. In the Matthew account, there is actually something more that Jesus said that kind of gives advice on handling tricky situations in the public forum. And before I read that little portion, I want to give context to why I think this is going to be an important statement from Jesus for us to consider. In the recent months, there are a lot of things that are going on in society that are significant shifts that would, I think, for most believers, feel like there is a movement and it's on a fast track away from the Judeo-Christian values that much of our experience and history of experience in America has been built on. And those values are no longer values, and we're seeing this tug of war in society. The question is what is our responsibility as believers, and either doing the culture war aspect or to influence the direction of where culture is going. And so in the end of the day, I think we are given a lot of principles from Scripture on how to engage those things, but I want to comment primarily what is on the heart and mind of God. On the heart and mind of God, you don't get, with how Jesus operated in his 3 years, that he was involved with any of the battle for the culture of Israel or the culture under Roman control. But you see a tremendous concern for the culture of a person's heart. So for God, he is looking upon the heart of an individual, not just a blanket statement of society. So as believers, I think the first cue we take from Jesus is that we are not battling a society. We're battling for the hearts of mankind. And when we think in terms of the heart, that will more easily guide us principally on how to engage challenging situations that we might be encountering here on this earth. So for instance, when we go before the councils, is it about winning that particular verdict? Or was it about winning the hearts of those sitting behind the bench? And I would say that based on what you see from Jesus, is he was concerned about the hearts of those who are hearing the testimony and those who are receiving the testimony behind the bench, those who sit in judgment. So it's not about winning some cultural battle. We already know that the prince of this world is not Jesus. The prince of this world, founded upon worldly principles, is Satan himself. And the culture bows to him, always has. And yes, there are seasons in time where the culture was greatly affected by what God was doing in changing hearts. But since the beginning of time, culture has continued to degrade. So as believers, are we to remain silent in regards to things in culture? I would say no. But how we go about engaging what's going on in our culture and in our communities, we have to have in mind the human heart. We are there not to win the argument. We are there to win the soul. I was in my work for my master's degree. I had to write a thesis, and I discovered this quote from antiquity. An argument won against the will is of the same opinion still. And when I first read that particular statement. An argument won against the will is of the same opinion still, speaks to the reality that in the moment, a very effective communicator, brilliant with his words and articulate in defense, can win the moment. But if the person who's on the receiving end of that was not willfully engaged into that conversation, they might have been moved in the moment, and so in that particular conversation, the other person won. But as soon as they move to somewhere else where they're not around that individual, they're like an elastic rubber band. It goes right back to its original default position because the will was not engaged. So as believers, we are sharing of what God has taught us about a biblical worldview, and we're considering how the human heart that's on the receiving end of our words would be affected by what we are saying. So having said that, the principle I'd like to add today is, if we talked about 2 weeks ago that we shouldn't have to worry about our words if we're stepping where God would want us to step, because he'll give us the words to say. But I would say there's also a mindset that is given in Matthew chapter 10, starting in verse 16. When Jesus says, I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves. Jesus speaking here. Since I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. In other words, you're going out innocently, not meaning to be ferocious, not attacking, not a threat to anyone. Yet wolves will prey on you because they're threatened by your peace. They're threatened by your hope. And so Jesus acknowledges that we're like sheep being tossed among these wolves. So what does he start with? In light of that, therefore, be shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves. So applying into those terms real quick, what does it mean to be shrewd? Well, in looking at it, it's basically somebody that is shrewd is very discerning and acutely aware of the intent or motive of another person. So being very attentive and aware of what is going on in the other person is what a snake is able to do so well. They anticipate actions. That's why snakes and serpents are so effective in defending themselves. They anticipate well. So Jesus says, in light of the fact that we're sheep being attacked by wolves sometimes in society, that we should operate shrewdly as a snake. Not shrewdly as sometimes that term gets used in society as like it's a businessman that tends to be like a very good negotiator, but it's to his own end. That's a possible way to look at that term, but in account for this term, it is a very clear awareness of anticipation of what the other person may do or may be thinking. So being shrewd as a snake, anticipatory of what may be going on around you. So if you're operating as a sheep, knowing that there's wolves around, you're going to be smart and savvy as to what they are actually up to and what they're doing. Don't be ignorant of what they might be thinking or how they might behave. But then it adds the spirit, but being innocent as doves, that when they are acting shrewdly of you, they sense and cannot accuse you of poor motives or of poor spirit. In fact, in 1 Peter 2, which I've mentioned before from the pulpit, that in 1 Peter 2, that we should live our lives so well among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may glorify your Father in heaven for your good works, because they can't find fault. So when Jesus says, be shrewd as a snake, being aware, anticipating how others might respond, so you can know how to respond and be prepared for that. But then our action in response to them is innocence, like that of a dove, where there is no maliciousness to the intent or practice of whatever that dove was wanting to do. It's simply being peaceful. That's why dove is usually a symbol of peace. and also a symbol of God. So shrewd, yes, but innocent, gentle, peaceful. And when judged, and when shrewdly being judged, that's the information they get. And then what Peter says is that when you behave that way, even the pagans will end up glorifying your God in heaven, even though they accuse you of doing wrong, because they realize they find no fault. Then you go to 1 Peter 3:15, and it says, so be prepared then to give an answer for the hope that you have. And when you answer, do so with gentleness and respect. So as ambassadors of the gospel in a community that's in need of Jesus, but in a community that does not value what Jesus values, we need to operate carefully, acknowledging that we're like sheaves among wolves, but we then handle with a savviness, like what Jesus talks about, a shrewdness like that of a snake, where we anticipate and know what our enemy is up to, but then our behavior is innocent like that of a dove, so that when accused, they find no fault, and as of finding no fault, they glorify your God. And when they glorify your God, they ask, how in the world? And then you respond with that gentle and respectful response. And I believe you're on the path to winning a heart. And it's one heart at a time as to how we can affect a community. And so may this be an encouragement to you that we can be world changers, and we can do so with a tenacity, but with an innocence and a spirit that is reflecting of the Spirit of God. So may these words from Jesus be in your mind as you consider what it means to be a sheep among wolves, but yet shrewd as a snake, innocent as a dove. God bless.